Stalemate, roadblock, call it what you want. U.S. markets are opening in 1 hour, and investors are not seeing a deficit reduction deal, a debt ceiling deal on the table. Our next guest says the markets are focused more on the debt ceiling and whether it will be raised by August 2nd deadline. Stan Collender is managing director with Qorvis Communications. He joins us now from Washington. And Stan, we're certainly focused on it. I couldn't think really about anything else. It's been a more gripping story almost than Rupert Murdoch was last week. But it doesn't look like markets are tanking just yet.
I think the key phrase there is just yet. The negative market reaction has started almost a month ago. It was slow, it was short, but it was perceptible. The same thing is happening today. Maybe the speed is accelerating a bit. If you look at the price of gold, there's clearly money going into that from other, as a safe haven. So the nervousness is there, but I want to impress upon everybody that the deadline that is saying that today was a key day for the Asian markets was being said by U.S. politicians over the weekend and not necessarily by the Asian markets themselves. But if this continues to go down to the wire, that reaction is going to continue to get worse.
Let me bring in Lizzie O'Leary here because she's been covering this story for us, obviously, the whole time, but all weekend, especially talking to people in Washington, talking to John Boehner's people. How much has Washington been playing up this sort of market angle as an incentive to move?
Well, I think that is something you see as an incentive to move. And I'm curious about Stan's take on this, because one of the things that I have heard, certainly from some Tea Party members, but also from some other GOP members, is they don't believe the Obama administration anymore. They don't believe Secretary Geithner. So if they say the markets are going to drop, well, basically they shrug it off and say, no, we've got enough in tax receipts to cover interest payments and we could probably muddle through. Nobody seems to be trusting one another anymore. Is that different? Has that gotten worse over the past few weeks? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I would agree with the word anymore. I don't think there was a lot of trust from the beginning of the year. So that's number one, Lizzie. Number two, there is almost a visceral dislike from some Tea Party folks to the White House and Democrats in general. So there's not a whole lot of trust. But, there's one additional thing to it, and that is that the same folks you've been talking to on the Hill who say they don't trust the administration are also denying that the markets will actually have any negative reaction, or that if it does, that it'll be that bad. Even if they're right, do they really want to take that kind of risk with the U.S. economy, the U.S. credit rating? It just seems inconceivable to me. And yet, as I've been telling Qorvis clients for several months now, the likelihood of a deal isn't as great as everyone seems. I mean, there are severe changes in politics, and this year compared to previous years, just because we've always had a deal in the past doesn't mean we're going to have one at this particular moment.
Although it seems the markets are sort of daring them not to do it. If we get to the 11th hour, can the president move by himself here? Do you think that's a viable option, Stan?
Well, first of all, yes, I do think it's a viable option. Second, I don't really know, and neither does anyone else, whether the president can move on his own. It would be a rather historic moment. There are some who think the 14th Amendment to the Constitution gives him that right. There are others, including the administration, that seem to indicate that the answer to that is no. But I'm not sure you need to rely on an amendment to the Constitution. I can easily see the president getting up on August 3rd, and if the market reaction is terrible, if they're perceiving serious negative impacts of what's going on, the president simply instructing the Secretary of the Treasury to borrow funds so the government can pay its bills, and then daring anybody either to sue him in court or to impeach him. And I do think there would be an almost immediate impeachment effort of both the Secretary of the Treasury and the president if that occurred.
Interesting stuff. All right, Stan, hey, thanks so much for joining us. Stan Collender there, managing director at Qorvis Communications, joining us from Washington.